Greetings, Jerry Ultimate Power Gamer, coming to you today with a battle report with commentary. We've got the Empire of Dust versus the Undead in the secure scenario. Okay, for starters, we're going to go over the table setup. So in the upper right-hand portion of the screen, we've got 4 pieces of height 4 blocking terrain. Just over from that, we've got 2 obstacles. There in the very center, we've got a height 0 difficult terrain, counts as flat difficult terrain. Over from there, we've got another obstacle and also another height 0 flat difficult terrain piece, followed by 2 more height 4 blocking piece of terrain and 2 more obstacles. Now the Undead player, his layout went just like this. In the lower left portion of your screen, you've got a regiment of werewolves. Next up from that, we've got a vampire on undead dragon. Next to that, we've got a horde of revenants. They do not have the crushing strength option, so they are defense 5. Behind them is going to be a necromancer with surge 8 and bane chant. And there at the very top right of your screen, we're going to see a regiment of revenant cavalry parked right there between the 2 buildings. Now, I was speaking to Brandon, and basically the plan he had going forward with this was going to be his regiment of werewolves. He was going to try to sweep my flank, and basically he was going to try to position his horde of revenants to hold the middle and have his vampire dragon in for support while his revenant cavalry threatened my other flank. Okay, and now on to the Empire of Dust. Starting on the left-hand side of your screen, I've got a regiment of scavengers. Right over next to that one building, I've got a scorpion husk. Next to that, I've got a regiment of mummies. Next to that, I've got 2 regiments of skeletal spearmen. Behind them, I've got a cursed high priest, and just to the right of those skeletal spearmen, I've got another regiment of mummies. Now, my battle plan, I wasn't too worried about the werewolves on my right flank because they didn't have Pathfinder. With the obstacle there and the buildings, I figured it would take them too long to try to sweep around my flank. I had a lot of protection there with the buildings and the difficult terrain. Now, up on my opposite flank, I was planning on just trying to move my scavengers into position to threaten flanks and rears of that regiment of revenant cavalry, but not actually engaging them. I was just going to try to hold or contest terrain pieces there since I am so mobile. Now, the Scorpion Husk, his job was going to be to vanguard out and threaten the revenant cav on my left flank, while also trying to hold a possible piece of terrain for scoring. Now, I had a pretty solid middle, I thought, and they were just going to come across and keep his horde busy. With any luck, I could arrange it so I could charge him in the front to keep him still and hit him in one or both flanks with my mummies before he could react. Okay, so as I said, the Scorpion Husk went ahead and made a at the double vanguard move, and it's sitting there in a position, and we get ready to go to roll to see who gets the first turn. Okay, so the Empire of Dust won the first turn, and the first thing I did, there on my far left flank, the regiment of scavengers made an at the double move and a 90-degree pivot at the end to threaten the flank of the revenant cavalry if they peeked out around the building. Also, my Scorpion Husk made a normal move up and a slight pivot to position so it could be out of sight of the revenant cavalry at their current position, and also threaten them if they poked out around the building there. But also, he was in a position to do a quick 90 and move over to support if I needed to do for that revenant horde coming across the table. In the middle, on the left there, my mummies and skeletons just moved up and started to cross the obstacle there. On the right flank there, the skeleton regiment and mummy regiment moved up and pivoted a little bit just to get in position to also support the middle and be ready for the regiment of werewolves if they decided to come through that little pass. The Cursed High Priest just moved up to have an inspiring range, and no shooting was done for me at all for this turn. So that was turn 1. Okay, so here we are, the end of the Undead player's turn 1 movement. Basically, the werewolves did an at the double to come up and just touch the obstacle. The Horde of Revenants in the center of the table just made a normal move up, followed by the Necromancer behind them. The Vampire on Undead Dragon just kind of did a slight pivot, moved over. He's getting in position to threaten my center there, but also to be able to go over and affect the Scorpion Husk if needs be. The regiment of cavalry there on the far right flank just moved up a little bit. They did not move up enough to expose their flank for a flank charge, but they did come up a little bit. So there was no shooting done this turn. So that's going to end out turn 1 for the Undead. Okay, turn 2 for the Empire of Dust. We had a little bit more movement going on. Beginning on the upper left corner of your screen, the Regiment of Scavengers moved forward 10, actually did a pivot, moved forward 10 and did a pivot, again to face and put a threaten on the flank of the Regiment of Revenant Cavalry. The Scorpion Husk did a pivot and moved up slightly to also be able to put a threat on there. It is out of line of sight for the Revenants Cavalry, so it's not worried about being charged. The mummies you see there in the center of the screen, they basically did a pivot, move 5, and then were later surged an additional 5 inches by the Cursed High Priest. In the center of the screen there, you see both units of Skeleton Spearmen moved forward a little bit and pivoted slightly. There at the bottom of the screen that you can hardly see, I've got the Regiment of Mummies. They moved forward slightly and also did a little pivot. So that was the end of turn 2 for the Empire of Dust. Okay, so at the end of the Undead's turn 2, basically here on the left of your screen, the mummies did a normal move to come up and over the obstacle and pivot once again to get in a position to threaten my flank. The Horde of Revenants there in the center did a normal move up 5 inches, followed by the Necromancer. The Vampire on Undead Dragon moved over a little bit to get in position to over and up to get into position to breathe on my Skeleton Spearmen there. And the Revenant Cavalry up at the top right of your screen decided to back a little bit because they were more concerned about the Scorpion Husk and the Regiment of Mummies coming at them, and they weren't that worried about the Regiment of Scavengers in the flank. So in the shooting phase, the Vampire on Undead Dragon went ahead and breathed on my Skeleton Spearman. He got 5 hits, and he ended up doing 3 wounds. Wasn't enough to do anything, though, because I happened to be Fearless 16, so wasn't enough to make me worry. So that's the end of the Undead's turn 2. Okay, so here we are, the end of turn 3 for the Empire of Dust. Well, at the top center of the screen, my Regiment of Scavengers went ahead and did a pivot, move 10 pivot, to put themselves directly in the rear of the Regiment of Revenant Cavalry to threaten their rear. The Scorpion Husk did a pivot and moved over to put some pressure on the Undead Zombie Dragon, along with the Horde of Revenants there in the center. The Regiment of Mummies there did the same thing. They did a pivot and moved 5. Both regiments of Skeleton Spearmen just kind of stayed still. The Regiment of Mummies there at the lower part of the screen, they basically just pivoted to face forward. didn't move at all, though just wanted to have a more of a forward attack profile. Now, once again, at the bottom of the screen, you see that regiment of werewolves. We weren't concerned about them because, one, the distance they are away, as well as not even quite sure if they can see me 100%, but more so wasn't concerned with the distance of them reaching me right now. My Cursed High Priest did a heal on the wounded skeleton regiment and was able to heal 2 wounds, so it actually only has 1 wound right now, and that is the end of the Empire of Dust turn 3. Okay, at the end of the Undead's turn 3, basically what happened at the lower portion of your screen, the regiment of werewolves finally got themselves in position to threaten the flanks of those mummy there. The Revenant Horde in the center of the screen charged my center unit of skeleton spearmen. It's a hindered charge. The Necromancer just moved up ever so slightly. The Undead Dragon went ahead and flew 10 inches, pivoted to get in position to breathe on my Scorpion Husk. And there at the top, you can see the Revenant Cavalry just ignored my scavengers in the rear, moved forward and peeked out around the building there to put a threatening on the mummies and just on the flank or the rear of the mummies, depending on what I decide to do. Now, in the shooting phase, the Necromancer was able to Bane chant the Revenants, the Revenant Horde. The Zombie Dragon breathed on the Scorpion Husk, did a total of 5 hits, but didn't do any wounds. In the hand-to-hand combat phase, the Revenant Horde there charged the Skeleton Spearmen. They were hindered. They hit 9 times, did 5 wounds. Wasn't enough to do anything because he did 11. He rolled Snake Eyes, so didn't break me. So that's where we're going to end up for turn 3 for the Undead. Okay, so here we are, the end of the Empire of Dust turn 4 movement. Basically what happens at the top of your screen, the regiment of scavengers just did a little positioning once again to stay in threat position of the rear of the Revenant regiment. And also in position to score anything if I needed to or contest scoring. The Scorpion Husk there did a hindered charge on the Vampire Undead Dragon. There in the center, I had 3 units charge that horde of Revenant infantry. In the flank, I had the 1 regiment of mummies, along with the 1 regiment of skeleton spearmen. I did something not correct here I wanted to tell you in the picture. The skeleton regiment there that was charged before, they did a counter charge. They actually should have shifted over to center up on the horde there instead of being where they were. The mummies did a slight pivot and moved up just to be within 1-inch surge of the Revenant Horde. I did that like that because I wanted to get them out of the difficult terrain so that when I surged them in, they would not be hindered. Basically what ended up happening, I got the surge off, so they ended up being in the combat. The fun thing, breaking down on the combats now. The Scorpion Husk managed to only do 2 hits on the Zombie Dragon, but he did do 1 wound, so the Zombie Dragon wasn't able to do anything to it, but he wouldn't be flying or he wouldn't be breathing this in his next turn. There, the big combat in the center of the table, basically the mummies that charged hindered in the flank, 24 attacks, they only did 9 hits, but they did 7 wounds. The skeletons that charged in the flank hindered, they did 3 hits, but 0 wounds. The counter-charging skeletons did 1 hit, and then the mummies that aren't hindered, charged in, they did 3 hits and 3 wounds. Total of 11, but not able to do any routing on the horde because their nerve was too high. So that's where we end my turn 4. Okay, here we are at the end of the undead player's turn 4 movement phase. Basically what happened is the vampire on Undead Dragon did a combined charge with the Revenant Horde into the mummy there at the center of the screen. Undead Dragon in the flank, Revenant Horde in the front. The Werewolf Regiment finally got a charge off, hinder charge, into the flank of the other unit of mummies. The Necromancer moved over behind the obstacle to make sure that it was out of charge range from the mummies and the skeletons, but able to see and bane chant the werewolves. At the top of the screen, the Revenant Cavalry just went ahead and moved up 8 inches to get into possible striking range later on. Basically, in the shooting phase, the Necromancer was able to bane chant the werewolf horde. The werewolves did a total of 11 hits and only managed to do 10 wounds. That's pretty good, but they were not able to rout the mummies. The dragon charging into the flank of the mummies there was able to do a total of 8 wounds. The Revenant Horde that countercharged into the front of the mummies only did 1 wound. He needed to roll. Even with a reroll, the mummies were not able to survive, so he was able to rout that mummy regiment there. At the end, the dragon decided to move back, so it was able to move back 3 inches, which allowed the Revenant Horde to pivot to be able to only put 1 unit in the flank there. So that's the end of turn 4 for the undead. Okay, end of turn 5 movement for the Empire of Dust. First of all, at the top of your screen, the regiment of scavengers got into position to threaten the rear and or flank of the Revenant Cavalry, while at the same time holding 2 objectives. In the center of your screen, I had a combined charge from 2 skeleton spearmen in the front and 1 regiment mummy unhindered charge in the flank. The mummies were able to regen 2 of their wounds, so that's where that is. The Scorpion Husk was unable to see the dragon, but it pivoted and was able to move to within 1 inch of the dragon, so I'm hoping to get a surge off with my Cursed High Priest. To end the suspense, during the shooting phase, Cursed High Priest was able to get the 1 inch surge, so the Scorpion Husk charged the flank of the dragon. Now, the unhindered mummies charging the flank of the Revenant Horde was able to do a total of 14 hits and 9 wounds. Now, the 2 skeleton regiments with the charge in the front, the hindered charge in the front of that Revenant Horde, was only able to hit 4 times. They needed 6s, but was able to do 3 wounds on that. Bringing the Horde to a total of 21 wounds, made the dice roll, was able to rout that Horde. Woohoo! Yay! Now, the Scorpion Husk into the flank of the Undead Dragon, I was able to get 7 hits and do a total of 6 wounds. Unfortunately, that was not enough to rout the dragon, so I just broke off. So that's the end of the movement phase for Empire of Dust turn 5. Okay, the end of turn 5 movement for the undead unit. The regiment of Revenant Cavalry charged the flank of my skeleton spearmen there. The vampire on Undead Dragon charged the flank of the other skeleton spearman unit, and the werewolves did a charge into the mummies. The necromancer just stayed where he was and bane chanted the werewolves. So at the end of the combats, basically what we had, the werewolves got 5 hits, did 4 wounds, put me at a total of 11 wounds, but he was not able to rout them, so they just backed off. The dragon did 10 hits onto the flank of the skeleton spearmen, 9 wounds, and he was able to rout them. And then the Cav did 13 hits and 10 wounds and also routed that skeleton unit. So Undead sitting in pretty good shape here at the end of turn 5. Okay, so for the end of the Empire of Dust turn 6, basically the scavengers just moved up ever so slightly, still in position to claim 2 objectives. The Scorpion hindered charge into the front of the dragon. The mummies just did an about face to get into position to hopefully do a surge. We were 2 inches away, but we were trying to do a surge into the rear of the zombie dragon. Basically, I was able to successfully surge the mummies, hindered surge into the rear of the dragon. After hand-to-hand combat, the mummies' rear charge did 12 hits, but only 5 wounds. The scorpion's front hindered charge did 3 hits, 1 wound, 11 total. And you know what happened. I was unable to rout Mr. Dragon, so that's where we end up into turn 6. Okay, so the end of Undead Turn 6 movement. Basically, we had the werewolves do a rear charge onto the regiment of mummies. The zombie dragon did a counter charge on the scorpion husk, and the regiment of revenant cavalry charged the flank of the scorpion husk. The necromancer basically just stayed in a position to make sure he could still do a Bane chant. He did fail to do the Bane chant though, but it didn't matter because the werewolves did so many wounds onto the mummies they were able to rout them. After they routed them, they just did a pivot to be able to claim both of those height 0 difficult terrain. The dragon and the revenant cavalry did enough wounds that I needed snake eyes to be able to survive, and guess what? They rolled snake eyes. So the at the end of turn 6, I'm sitting there with the only thing I have left on the table is my regiment of scavengers way off to the side, my cursed high priest who can't hold, and my scorpion husk there. We did roll for turn 7, so we'll be back after turn 7. Okay, so the end of the Empire Dust turn 7 final. The regiment of scavengers stays exactly where they are, so I'm holding 2 objectives. The scorpion husk does a counter charge into the zombie dragon. Basically, the scorpion husk was able to wound the zombie dragon and rout it, at which point it just turned to face the skeleton cav. At this point, we're looking at, I've got 2 objectives, he's got 2 objectives, so it looks like it could be a draw, but he still has 1 turn. Let's see what happens. Okay, here we are for the final turn 7 for the undead player. Basically, the regiment of revenant cavalry did a charge onto my scorpion husk, and the regiment of werewolves moved into position to be able to grab 3 pieces of terrain. During the combat phase, the revenant cavalry did an amazing amount of hits, and they basically routed my scorpion husk. So at the end of the game, I only held 2 terrain pieces by my scavengers, and the undead player held a total of 4 pieces, so big win for the undead player. Actually, I'd like to hear any comments everybody has about this new format I just tried out test here. Questions, comments, as always, love to hear them. Look forward to more battle reports. See you next time.